What really happened to Jeffrey Epstein inside that jail cell? That single question still shakes the public years later, and the newly released Epstein files have poured gasoline on a fire that never went out. Every detail, every image, every line in these documents raises fresh doubts, sparks new arguments, and forces people to look again at a death that many still refuse to accept at face value. Tonight, we break it all down with Global USA News. We have been closely examining every part of the latest Jeffrey Epstein file release, which came after the Epstein Files Transparency Act required the Department of Justice to turn over nearly everything it had related to the Epstein investigation. These files cover many areas, but one issue stands above the rest and continues to dominate public debate. That issue is Epstein's death. This case has never been simple. When Jeffrey Epstein was found dead in his jail cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York on August 10, 2019, he was awaiting federal charges for sex trafficking of minors. Almost immediately, two sides formed. One side believed he died by suicide. The other side believed something far darker happened. They argued that Epstein was too powerful, had too many connections, and knew too much to be left alive. Authorities officially ruled his death a suicide, but for many people, that ruling never settled anything. Questions have lingered ever since. Now, with these newly released files, people are asking again whether the full truth was ever revealed. According to a Department of Justice and FBI memo released in July, investigators stated that after a thorough review, they concluded Jeffrey Epstein took his own life in his cell. They said this conclusion matched earlier findings, including the August 19, 2019 autopsy by the New York City Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, the November 2019 position of the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, and the June 2023 conclusions of the Department of Justice Office of the Inspector General. Officials emphasized that while Epstein was not killed, there were major failures inside the jail. These failures included poor supervision, missed checks, and serious institutional breakdowns that allowed the death to happen. Even so, many people continue to believe there is more to the story. One of the most disturbing revelations in the new file release is the appearance of previously unseen photographs of Epstein's body. These images come from a declassified FBI report from the New York field office. There are around 20 photographs in total. They are graphic and deeply unsettling. Most cannot be shown publicly. The images reportedly show Epstein's body on a stretcher while medical staff attempt to assist him. Other photos show his jail cell in disarray. Some images focus closely on injuries to his neck, including what appears to be a fractured bone. There is also a close-up image of his head and visible neck trauma. One important detail remains unclear even now. The noose that Epstein allegedly used has never been clearly identified. Something was collected at the scene, but according to the Inspector General's report, it was not confirmed to be what caused his death. The files also revisit Epstein's earlier reported suicide attempt weeks before his death. According to jail officials, Epstein was found lying in a fetal position in his cell. One report included in the files states that as staff placed Epstein on a stretcher, he opened his eyes and appeared to observe them. When staff made eye contact, he reportedly shut his eyes quickly. This detail alone has raised eyebrows among critics. There is also documentation showing concern inside the jail system even before Epstein's death. A July 25, 2019 email with names redacted referenced an inquiry into Epstein's suicide attempt. The email noted that both the U.S. Marshals Service and the Daily News were already asking questions. This shows that Epstein's mental state and safety were already under scrutiny. Another major focus in the new files is jail surveillance footage from the night before Epstein was found dead. According to reporting, the footage shows an orange-colored shape moving up a staircase toward the tier where Epstein was housed at approximately 10:39 p.m. Why does this matter? Epstein was believed to have died before 6:30 a.m. the next morning, when a correctional officer discovered his body during breakfast rounds. Any movement near his cell during the night has become a critical point of debate. According to a Department of Justice Inspector General memo, there was only one working camera in the special housing unit that night. The video quality was poor, and the camera angle showed only part of the area, including a partial view of the stairs. The footage was so unclear that investigators said they could not properly identify individuals, other than possibly guessing whether someone appeared male or female. The jail's daily assignment records showed that between 10 p.m. and 11 p.m. on August 9th, 2 correctional officers were assigned to the special housing unit. At 10:39 p.m., investigators noted a flash of orange going up the stairs. The FBI said it could possibly be an inmate being escorted, but this detail had not been publicly discussed by authorities at the time. Later interpretations differed. The Office of the Inspector General suggested the orange shape might not have been an inmate at all. They proposed it could have been a correctional officer carrying inmate clothing or bedding. In their report, they stated that at approximately 10:39 p.m., an unidentified correctional officer appeared to walk up the stairway and then reappeared around 10:41 p.m. According to the Inspector General, this was believed to be the last time anyone entered that tier before 6:30 a.m. They also reported no correctional officers or other individuals were observed entering any of the housing tiers during the night. This matched admissions from staff that required inmate counts and rounds were not conducted during that time. However, outside video analysts previously argued that the movement looked more like an inmate wearing an orange prison uniform rather than an officer carrying items. Analysts also noted that escorting an inmate at that time would have been unusual. This disagreement continues to fuel suspicion. The situation becomes even more troubling when looking at staff behavior that night. One officer reportedly said a fellow officer fell asleep during the shift. Another officer later discovered Epstein's body. Investigators found that required inmate counts and wellness checks were not performed for hours, despite Epstein having been identified as a suicide risk weeks earlier. There were also discrepancies in inmate count numbers, which reportedly changed during the night. One officer later said she may have simply made a mistake. A sworn statement from the officer who found Epstein describes ripping down a sheet and lowering Epstein to the floor before attempting CPR. When asked about removing the noose, he said he did not recall taking it off or removing anything from Epstein's neck. Another officer stated she did not see a noose at all. The New York City Medical Examiner's Office reviewed the surveillance footage 6 days after Epstein's death and found it too blurry to identify anyone. Yet only hours later, they publicly announced Epstein's death was a suicide. Despite missed checks, missing footage, and admitted failures, the Department of Justice ultimately concluded there was no evidence that Epstein was killed and no proof of outside involvement. Charges against the 2 officers for falsifying records were later dropped in exchange for their cooperation. The files also revealed something unusual that happened after Epstein's death. A decoy was reportedly used when removing his body from the prison to mislead the media. Boxes and sheets were arranged to resemble a body and placed into one vehicle, while Epstein's actual body was transported in another. This move, while explained as crowd control, only added more fuel to public speculation. Another critical piece of the files includes psychological evaluations weeks before Epstein died. In these reports, Epstein repeatedly denied being suicidal. He told prison psychologists he had no intention of killing himself and described having a life worth living. He said he was focused on his legal defense and future.
In one report, Epstein said it would be crazy to end his life. He admitted feeling depressed about being incarcerated, but denied hopelessness. He expressed interest in returning to general population and continuing his legal fight. The next day, Epstein complained about being held in the special housing unit. He described it as unfair and dangerous. He said it was noisy, dirty, and made it hard to work on his legal case. Once again, he denied any suicidal thoughts and said he wanted to live. However, an FBI interview with a Bureau of Prisons captain suggested Epstein may have been manipulative and tried to avoid having a cellmate. The report stated that Epstein had been downgraded from suicide watch after being assessed as not suicidal. There was also concern that he may have tried to get back on suicide watch for housing reasons. This raises another theory. Some believe Epstein may not have intended to die, but may have tried to injure himself to change his conditions. Whether that theory holds any truth remains unknown. The files also show continued efforts by Epstein's brother, Mark Epstein, to push for further investigation. He repeatedly submitted tips and complaints to the FBI.
Just 2 days before he died, Jeffrey Epstein made major changes to his will. This detail alone has caused endless debate. The documents show that the will was structured through a trust and was signed by his attorney and his accountant. According to the paperwork, his attorney was set to receive $50 million, while his accountant was to receive $25 million. These are massive sums, and they immediately caught public attention. Even more striking was what Epstein planned to leave to a woman described as his apparent or secret girlfriend, Karina Schultz. The documents state that if she survived him, she would receive $50 million outright. In addition to that, the trustees were directed to purchase a $50 million annuity for her benefit. That totals $100 million dedicated to her alone. The will also listed specific properties meant to go to her. These included Epstein's New Mexico ranch, known as Zorro Ranch, his private island, Little St. James, the neighboring Great St. James Island, his Paris residence, his Palm Beach property, and his mansion in New York City. He also intended to give her a 33-carat diamond ring, reportedly in contemplation of marriage. There is also documentation showing Epstein spoke with her for around 20 minutes in an unrecorded phone call the night before his death. This call has never been fully explained. Some believe this shows planning and final conversations. Others argue it shows he did not intend to die at all. Other beneficiaries included Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein's brother Mark, who were each set to receive $10 million. Mark Epstein's share was to be placed into a trust for his children. These financial preparations have led to two competing interpretations. One view is that Epstein was preparing for suicide. Another is that he feared for his life and wanted his affairs settled. The files also include more references to internal prison concerns. A post-incident psychological report noted that Epstein had adamantly denied suicidal thoughts multiple times. He consistently described himself as future-focused. He spoke about fighting his case and returning to normal life. These statements clash sharply with the official conclusion of suicide, at least in the eyes of skeptics. At the same time, prison officials documented concerns about Epstein's behavior. Some reports suggested he disliked having a cellmate and engaged in actions that could be seen as manipulative. There were discussions among staff about keeping him under closer observation and ensuring he was not housed alone. Despite this, he ultimately ended up alone in his cell. The failure to enforce these precautions remains one of the most troubling aspects of the case. Epstein had previously been placed on suicide watch. That status was later removed. Required 30-minute checks were not consistently performed. Overnight rounds were missed. Video surveillance was limited, poorly positioned, and low quality. All of this created a perfect environment for disaster.
The newly released files also include summaries of inmate opinions and staff views. Inmates housed nearby reportedly said they did not see anyone approach Epstein's cell. Staff members made similar statements. Camera footage, despite its flaws, did not clearly show anyone entering the tier after the late evening hours. These details continue to support the official ruling, at least on paper. Still, the unusual decisions made after Epstein's death keep questions alive. The use of a decoy body to mislead the media was highly unusual. While officials said it was done to manage press attention, critics argue it only deepened public distrust. There is also the issue of timing. The medical examiner reviewed the video footage and declared it too blurry to identify anyone. Yet the suicide determination was announced shortly after. To many observers, this sequence feels rushed, even if it followed proper procedures. Epstein's brother Mark has never accepted the suicide ruling. The files show that he continued submitting tips to the FBI years later, alleging murder and requesting further investigation. Each time, authorities reaffirmed their findings and stated there was no evidence of criminal involvement by others. The documents also highlight the internal acknowledgement of massive institutional failure. The Department of Justice and the Office of the Inspector General repeatedly stated that the jail failed Epstein. Guards were overworked. Staff shortages were severe. Policies were ignored. Logs were falsified. These failures did not cause homicide, according to investigators, but they made suicide possible. For many people, that explanation is still not enough. Epstein's wealth, power, and connections make his death feel different from other cases. The idea that such a high-profile inmate could die under these conditions continues to feel unacceptable to large portions of the public. What the newly released Epstein files ultimately do is not solve the mystery, but expand it. They provide more detail, more context, and more raw information than ever before. They show a system riddled with errors, conflicting interpretations, and unanswered questions. They also reveal a man who denied wanting to die, complained about his conditions, planned for the future, and yet ended up dead in a cell where basic safety procedures were not followed. Whether that contradiction points to suicide, manipulation, or something more remains a matter of intense debate. What is clear is this: the Epstein case will not fade quietly into history. These files ensure that discussions will continue. People will keep questioning, investigators will keep defending their conclusions, and the public will keep asking whether the full truth has ever been told. For now, all we have are documents, testimony, images, and interpretations. They do not give closure. They do not provide a final answer everyone can agree on, but they do offer more transparency than ever before. That is where things stand today. More information, more context, more controversy, and still no ending that satisfies everyone. Global USA News will continue to follow every development as new details emerge.